Hi, I'm former Congressman Joe DioGuardi, the founder of the Albanian American Civic League, Liga Cittadina Shqiptare Americana, the only registered lobby for the Albanian people in Washington, D.C. We have done a lot for the Albanian people since I left Congress. The Albanian American Civic League has been in the front of all the important things that have been done. Think about it. Democracy for Albania, 1990. The trip I took there with Tom Lantos to open the door, and finally to lead two congressional delegations, 91, where they had the invalid election that we called invalid, and 92, when we got the Democratic Party elected. And then we had the issue of Mr. Milosevic, his genocidal march in the Balkans, starting in Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, 1995, 250,000 innocent people killed. But his big prize was Kosova. We knew it. We warned our friends in Congress, Tom Lantos, Ben Gilman, Henry Hyde, and we got Gilman and Hyde and Lantos to play a very key role with hearings and resolutions to warn Congress what we saw coming. And sure enough, in 1989, Mr. Milosevic occupied Kosova brutally. 1990, I went to Pristina with Tom Lantos, and we told Mr. Milosevic to his face that America was watching everything you do. And that led to his actual indictment in 2002 in The Hague when Shirley and I went there to testify against him. But I think the most important thing, if you can think about one thing more important than the other, but you can't really disconnect them because the Albanian people are one nation. But in the year 2008, it was George W. Bush that declared the independence for Kosova. It took some 20 years or more, and it started with that first resolution in earnest in 1992 that Tom Lantos introduced for independence of Kosova. We had to educate congressmen and their staffs what Kosova was, what its status was as a juridical unit in the Confederation of Yugoslavia, where every 8 years, each of those units represented Yugoslavia as its president, including Albania. Milosevic took that all away. How do you help us commemorate the 25th anniversary? Well, you should be a member of the Albanian American Civic League. We have a website, www.aacl.com. Do your part to empower the lobby, the Albanian American Civic League, the way we empowered the Albanian people in the Balkans. Our work is not done. We have a lot of work to do, shumë punë, and we've got to do it with a pen, with a computer, with our speeches, with our hearings. We have to continue the work we did that brought democracy to Albania and independence for Kosova, and our work is not done there yet. We still haven't, corruption to deal with. In a way, we went from communism to corruption. But we still have great repression in Montenegro, in Macedonia, in Prisheva, and in Greece. The issue of Chamria has not gotten any attention whatsoever. So we have a lot of work to do, shumë punë, and I hope that you join us in this 25th year as a member of the Albanian American Civic League, Liga Cittadina Shqiptare Americana, so that we can all work together. Our work is not yet finished, but the future of the Albanian people is in your hands. Thank you.
The Serbian government says its offer for open, unconditional talks with the Albanians still stands. But Albanian leaders have snubbed the Serb delegates twice and are expected to do so again on Monday. Albanians are demanding freedom from Serb rule. Tens of thousands of protesters marched peacefully through the streets of Pristina Friday, calling on the international community to intervene. And joining us now from New York to talk more about the crisis and the U.S. congressional debate on Kosovo policy is former Congressman Joseph DioGuardi. Mr. DioGuardi is also president of the Albanian American Civic League. Mr. DioGuardi, we're hearing mixed reports. Earlier we heard that it was relatively quiet, and now we're hearing there are mixed instances of some violence. Have you heard from any of the people back there?
In fact, just on the way down to your studios here in New York, I received a call, and I was told that fighting started again in the village of Lyusha, which is one of the 4 villages in this Stranica region. So I think we're going to see a continuation of this. You know, we've seen how Mr. Milosevic responds because of our experience in Bosnia. Unless the West is prepared to take swift action, I've heard the strong words in Congress and Mrs. Madeleine Albright's strong words, but unless we're prepared to take swift action, you will not see Mr. Milosevic back off.
What do you mean by swift action?
Well, we just had a congressional hearing, and I was delighted to see that a hearing that was called on Bosnia, and it was because in great part of the efforts of our Albanian American Civic League that we shifted the emphasis of that hearing to Kosova. And there was a lot of tough talk from Ambassador Gelbard and from the administration. But talk does not work. In terms of swift action, we need to do what we did in Bosnia 2 years too late.
In other words, you're talking about military.
Well, we need to establish a no-fly zone immediately. We know that they're using heavily armed helicopters. There's no reason for that kind of force to be used against innocent civilians. We should be ringing the border of Yugoslavia right now with NATO troops in Macedonia, in Bulgaria, in Montenegro. There's no reason why we shouldn't show Mr. Milosevic that the West is resolved to see this conflict contained and to see the political rights of the Albanian people, long-suffering Albanian people of Kosova, finally addressed.
In your view, where is the holdup? Is it in Congress or elsewhere?
Well, it appears that our State Department is thinking long and hard about the actions. We like the tone of the statements made by the Secretary of State and by Ambassador Gelbard, but there should be no secret as to what works with Mr. Milosevic. In fact, he should be on the list of war criminals in The Hague. Why we have embraced the person who started the Balkan conflict back in Kosovo in 1989, the war in Slovenia in 1991, and then Croatia, and then Bosnia, and put him at the peace table at the Dayton Accords, I don't know. It was Congressman Dana Rohrabacher who said to Ambassador Gelbard, is Mr. Milosevic, and he said it euphemistically, on the list of war criminals? And Gelbard said no, and then Rohrabacher says, but we're dealing with all of his buddies who are war criminals, Mr. Karadzic, Mr. Milosevic. We have to understand that you cannot trust Mr. Milosevic. Look at his actions, and you'll see what he's about to do in Kosovo.
Okay, I can tell you this, that the Pentagon is saying now that absolutely no consideration is given, or is being given, to sending in troops either from Canada or the United States.
Well, we already have a force in Macedonia. I can't believe that they're not considering right now to expand that force, that protection force made up now of U.S. troops and Norwegian troops. I believe it totals about 600. It seems to me that the only answer right now is to show resolve. We didn't show it for 2 years in Bosnia, and we lost 200,000 people, and we had a conflagration there second to none.
Let me ask you this. The ministers of the European Union are suggesting that further sanctions should be imposed on Belgrade. Is that going to work?
Sanctions don't seem to work with Mr. Milosevic. That's what the hearing was all about. We did get a very tough resolution. It was made even tougher because of the efforts of the Albanian American Civic League that represents the concerns of 400,000 ethnic Albanians here in America. But sanctions will not be enough. We need to show resolve. We should move an aircraft carrier off the coast of Montenegro. Let it stay there. We should ring Serbia with troops. Let them stay there. If we see one move, and don't forget, Ralph, 2 presidents drew a line in the sand. President Bush on the way out and President Clinton on the way in said if there's any military or paramilitary action in Kosovo, we would move swiftly. That question was put to Mr. Gelbard, Ambassador Gelbard, and he said that foreign policy declaration is still in effect.
Do you think that kind of activity worked in Bosnia?
Absolutely. The only time we saw the Serbian regime come to the table to try to resolve something was when they knew the West was ready to act.
We only have a few more moments. Let me ask you this. It's to many people, it's a very, very confusing story, and you have to go back into history. How did the ethnic Albanians get into this situation in the first place?
It is a very confusing story, but let me say this. The ethnic Albanians of Kosovo were there for over 5,000 years. You can't believe the Serbian propaganda machine. They did not move to Kosova or Macedonia or Montenegro. This is one half of the divided nation of Albanians. You have 3.5 million Albanians in the state of Albania and 3.5 just outside its borders.
Okay.
And they were there.
Joseph DioGuardi, thank you very much for sharing your views and perspective with us today.
Thank you.
Nightmare in the Balkans. Refugees from Kosovo, but what are Europe's options for ending their misery? Hello everyone, welcome to CNN's interactive news program Q&A. Kosovo, Serbia's small but independence-minded province, is in flames. Battles between Serbian security forces and rebels show no sign of abating. The people continue to flee, while the international community, the US, the European Union, NATO and Kosovo's neighbors try to figure out where to go from here. Joseph DioGuardi is president of the Albanian American Civic League. He's a former US congressman who's now lobbying Washington to put the squeeze on Yugoslav's president Slobodan Milosevic. Joe DioGuardi, let me start with you. You're lobbying the US administration on Kosovo. Where does the issue appear on the list of the US administration's priorities in the first place?
First, let me say that I'm the volunteer president of the Albanian American Civic League, the only registered lobby of the Albanian people here in America, representing the concerns and interests of some 400,000 Albanian Americans, and Kosovo is at the top of our list. I try to go to Washington as much as I can. I was there yesterday to speak in front of the Institute of Peace. There were many people from the State Department there to let them know that our foreign policy is a mess, it's failing, that they have blood on their hands. Mr. Holbrooke has blood on his hands. NATO has already discredited itself. We've been through this before. We saw it in Bosnia. We diddled, waffled, and dawdled for 3 years, saying that nothing could be done, and then finally, we couldn't take the bloodshed anymore after seeing Srebrenica and the market square in Sarajevo. We're seeing it right now in Kosovo, and we acted.
Bassam in London's been hanging on for a while. Go ahead, Bassam, your question, please.
Hi, my question is, why wouldn't the Serbs crack down in Kosovo? Everyone was a lot of promises, so it's not going to repeat another Bosnia. So where is these promises now? What is a Bosnia was different than Kosovo is now?
Joseph DioGuardi, what do you think?
Well, it's obvious that there is no difference. The only difference between Bosnia and Kosovo right now is that we have troops in Bosnia. That's why it's not falling apart. And we don't have troops in Kosovo. We have to show resolve with Mr. Milosevic. We know his modus operandi, his M.O. When he senses waffling, when he senses some indecision, he tends to move. Don't forget, his biggest concern is his political base in Belgrade. He's a Stalinist communist. He's lied to the people of Serbia. He controls all the media. And what he wants to do is to increase his own power there, and he's using the blood of the Albanian people in Kosovo. It's a mess, and the only one that can resolve this right now is the only superpower to do it, the United States of America, and we've got to get Madeleine Albright talking tough again, and she should not be muffled by Sandy Berger, and Mr. Holbrooke has blood on his hands for dealing with Mr. Milosevic. Well, he's a war criminal, and he's got to be treated that way.
I'm going to get to a question that's going on our internet chat room as we go out live. It says, why hasn't Albania jumped in and helped their fellow Albanians? Go ahead.
On the way down, on my cellular phone, I received a call from one of our contacts in Albania, and as we're speaking, the Albanian parliament is meeting, and it's significant that I was told that the socialists are now joining with the opposition to mobilize the army, and they've ordered Fatos Nano, the prime minister, who, by the way, is vacationing in Greece, of all places, for the Albanians, and to get back to Tirana. So what I'm saying is that this could be our worst fears being confirmed, that this will now spread into a Balkan war, and that's why our foreign policy here is failing.
And Joe, how reliable are your sources on that information?
Well, they were watching Today TV in Tirana, and this was going on as he was calling me on the phone.
This email question from Lahore in Pakistan, Farhana Sayed says, if reports of mass graves had been confirmed, would the EU and NATO be more likely to act then?
I believe they already know there are mass graves. Don't forget what happened 3 years ago. Our State Department covered up. They knew there were mass graves. That's why several senior officials resigned. This is a moral issue right now, and it's outrageous. In fact, an article was just written by our Balkan Affairs advisor, Shirley Cloyes, of the Albanian American Civic League, and she quotes Congressman Lantos, who knows oppression. He was someone who was saved from the Nazi Holocaust, and he goes, quote, We have a moral obligation to identify with the people of Kosova. They have been persecuted, discriminated against, and killed by a police state. Kosovo Albanians have suffered enough. That's Tom Lantos in the House of Representatives on March 12th. There's no question there are mass graves there. We just don't want to admit it because we're not willing to show resolve. That's the only way we're going to solve this.
All right, let's get a quick call in from Switzerland. Eileen, your question brief, please, because we've only got a minute left.
Yeah, can I do the question?
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Mr. DioGuardi has often repeated that American administration has failed in Balkan. So I want to ask if exists any possibility for solution to save Albanians, to save Kosovo, and to put peace in Balkan. This is my question.
Well, the only way to do it is what we did 3 years too late in Bosnia. We have to take the lead. We have to show Mr. Milosevic that there is pain he has to take for his actions. Sanctions will not work. We have seen this over and over again. Only the credible threat of force or the use of it. And that doesn't mean that we have to commit U.S. troops to Kosovo. As we saw in Bosnia 3 years later, 3 years after we should have acted, we did some surgical things, military actions that sent the signal that the time was up for Mr. Milosevic, and he backed off. We have to do the same things now.
Thanks very much, and Joseph DioGuardi, thanks very much for joining us there in New York.
Hello and welcome to World News Europe. I'm Fionnuala Sweeney in London. A massacre of 45 ethnic Albanians in Kosovo province is prompting defiant moves from the Belgrade government. Yugoslavia is ordering the American head of the Kosovo Observer mission to leave the country within 48 hours. The move comes after William Walker blamed Yugoslav forces for the killings on Friday in the village of Račić. Authorities say Walker overstepped his mandate. The chief prosecutor of the War Crimes Tribunal at The Hague had hoped to investigate the site. Louise Arbour was turned back by Yugoslav border guards on Monday. Russia, a traditional Serb ally, is sending a deputy foreign minister to Belgrade for consultations. The government is expressing concern over the decision to expel Walker and Friday's killings. So also are the US and Britain.
Thank you very much.
Well, in the wake of the massacre, Albania's parliament is calling on all Albanians to unite in their support of their ethnic kin in Kosovo province. Joe DioGuardi is a former US congressman and president of an international group working for independence for Kosovars, and he now joins us for some perspective on this conflict. First of all, let me ask you about your reaction to the Yugoslav authorities' decision to expel William Walker this evening.
Well, it's nice to be here in London, by the way, and thank you for this opportunity. It's outrageous, and this is typical of Mr. Milosevic. He does not care about international law. Right from the beginning, as president of the Albanian American Civic League, I've been saying that our foreign policy in the United States and the foreign policies here in Europe have been a death sentence for the Albanian people. They are subject to a brutal dictator who started this back in 1989 when he walked into Kosovo and forcibly occupied it. And what you see today, these massacres, is proof positive that the real terrorists are the Serbian police and Mr. Milosevic.
What do you think is Mr. Milosevic's end game here by expelling William Walker, by not allowing UN officials to investigate the scene of the massacres over the weekend? What do you think? Is he trying to up the ante with the international community?
He's a very complex person, a very devious person. He's much like Hitler in the way he thinks, and he's exploiting the United States. He's exploited Mr. Holbrooke, and I'll bet that part of his policy here is to try to escalate it to a point where the KLA will try to overact, or is made to overact, to protect their citizens so that he can keep calling them terrorists. There's kind of a parity, and I don't understand why, being created between the KLA and they're defending their homeland, defending their families and villages, and this Serbian army, which has been getting away with massacres. And this has got to stop.
In your position, do you support either Ibrahim Rugova, who's been trying to achieve an accommodation by sort of parliamentary political means, or the KLA?
Well, there's no question that the people of Kosovo support the KLA, and that's what counts. There was a referendum for independence back in 1991. The people of Kosovo have spoken. They want independence. They don't want to live under the boot of a dictator who has no respect for them. And as one of your own MPs said yesterday, I heard him on an interview, Patty Ashton, that Mr. Milosevic has certainly now lost the moral authority to lead in Kosova.
Are you disappointed by your own government's reaction to events in the former Yugoslavia?
I have said for months, and certainly in the last year, that our State Department has blood on its hands for allowing Mr. Milosevic to duplicate what he did in Bosnia. We waited 3 years too late for the airstrikes, which we should be doing now, and 300,000 people perished. How many Albanians have to die like this, civilians, before we take action against Mr. Milosevic?
Well, the UN met had held emergency consultations today, and they broke up. They criticised the decision to expel William Walker and condemned what had taken place over at the weekend. Do you have any faith in the United Nations' ability to monitor at least the situation in Kosovo or bring about some resolution?
The time for talking is over. Milosevic does not understand talk. He will lie his way through, as he did in Bosnia. All those acts that we saw against civilians, he blamed on the Bosnians, the so-called Muslims. He's doing the same now in Kosovo. He will not change his modus operandi. His goal is to have complete domination in this area. Even recently, those 8 young men in the bar in Peja that were killed, those were not Serbs. They were Montenegrins. And we believe they were killed by the Serbs in order to get the sympathy of the Montenegrins to jump into this war against the Albanians.
Now, you're saying the time for talking is over. You're talking about military strikes?
Absolutely.
What happens after the military strikes?
Well,
what kind of political accommodation can be reached between Slobodan Milosevic and the ethnic Albanians?
Don't you think the international community has the obligation to protect innocent civilians? A runaway outlaw government is now killing them wantonly. We saw this in World War II with the Nazi regime. The first thing we have to do is to protect those innocent civilians. Airstrikes. We did it in Bosnia. We waited 3 years too late. We lost 300,000 people. Why don't we start with the airstrikes and show Mr. Milosevic that we have resolve? When he sees that resolve, he will back off, and then we'll take the next step.
Joe DioGuardi, there we have to leave it, but thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome back. In the long hours at Rambouillet, the Kosovar Albanian delegation was asked to put its faith in Western promises of military protection and significant political gains. Madeleine Albright called it the best deal they could hope for. The Albanians agreed in principle, but they didn't sign. Was that a mistake? Joining us now is Joe DioGuardi, a former U.S. Congressman, now with the Albanian American Civic League. Thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure, Jonathan.
Why didn't they sign, and what does agreement in principle really amount to, do you think?
Well, they didn't sign for a simple reason, because the agreement as it stands now would be nothing less than a death warrant for the Albanian Kosovars. You have to remember how this began. It began in 1987 when Slobodan Milosevic rose to power by coming to Kosovo on a platform of anti-Albanian racism and Greater Serbia. He occupied Kosovo in 1989, took away all the jobs, all the schools, all the courts, the separate parliament of Kosovo. Everything was removed. The Kosovars have lived in a concentration camp for 10 years. There's been nothing like this since Adolf Hitler created the concentration camps in Germany. They cannot go back. They have declared their independence in a referendum in 1991. The Slovenes did, and they got out. The Croatians did, and they got out. The Bosnians did, and they got out. And by the way, they are all Slavs, just like the Serbs. The Albanians are not Slavs. Why should they be forced to live with people who treat them like untermenschen?
So let me ask you, once again, they left with the impression that they agreed in principle. Were they just being polite? Is this really a non-starter to any Kosovar Albanian nationalist, this kind of a deal?
I believe that what happened in Rambouillet was a failure. I predicted it would be, because unless we were prepared to use force, and we have declared that we were prepared, how many times, I can't count. The only reason that the carnage in Bosnia stopped is that we finally, after 2 years, after losing 250,000 people, struck the military installations of Slobodan Milosevic, and then Dayton began. There were no strikes before Rambouillet. There were no troops put into Kosova. So why should Milosevic believe in anything? And by the way, he didn't go to Rambouillet. These talks were doomed to begin with. And now the appearance is being given that the burden for not signing is being put on the Albanian Kosovars. It's wrong. And now they're creating parity. I heard the deputy ambassador. The real terrorist is Slobodan Milosevic. He's been in effect indicted by the U.S. Senate in a resolution last June, by the U.S. House of Representatives in a resolution last September, a month later by the European Parliament. All have said that his acts in Bosnia and Kosovo are enough to bring him to The Hague to be indicted as a war criminal. Why are we dealing with a war criminal? Why is Holbrooke and Hill spending any time with this man?
Well, let me jump in and ask you a question. The U.S. government has been reluctant as well to throw in its lot with the KLA. There's a feeling in Washington, I don't have to tell you, that the KLA are a proto-terrorist group who were themselves responsible for ethnic cleansing of Serbs, getting them out of Kosovo.
Not at all. This is Serbian propaganda, and when we approached a hearing on March 12th, just about a year ago, when the word terrorist was mistakenly used by Gelbard. He was asked questions by Congressman Gilman and Congressman Lee Hamilton, then the ranking Democrat. He backed right off. He says, no, it has not been declared a terrorist organization. These people are freedom fighters. How many years can you live under the control of a brutal dictator with your families being killed, towns being destroyed, people being disappeared and tortured, until you say we now have to defend ourselves because we see the West is not willing to defend us?
If that's the case, and if that's the conclusion that they've drawn, and if that's the right conclusion, March 15th, they're going to be called back to France and asked to disarm and put their faith in a Western guaranteed agreement with Slobodan Milosevic. Should Kosovar Albanians agree to anything of that kind, giving up weapons and hoping for the best for the future in March or at any other time?
I doubt that they will, because we have seen from experience that you cannot trust Slobodan Milosevic. He's a liar. He's a war criminal. He's an ultra-nationalist who's now breaking bread with Mr. Zyganov in Russia and Belarus. He's trying to create a new greater Serbia that goes way beyond the Balkans. How can we trust this man? Without U.S. troops as part of a NATO force in Kosovo, nothing can begin. And it seems to me that they didn't want to discuss that. And what happened was Madeleine Albright, to save face, shifted in the last few days to blaming the Albanians for not signing because she knew the Serbs would never accept a U.S. peacekeeping or a NATO peacekeeping force.
Joe DioGuardi of the Albanian American Civic League. Thanks so much for this.
Thank you.
Reflecting some of the argument now going on Capitol Hill about whether or not the U.S. has a role to play in Kosovo. With diplomatic avenues all but exhausted and a feeling of hopelessness setting in over the Balkans, I'd like to bring in a guest who was in the region recently for his take on the problems there. Joseph DioGuardi is a former congressman from New York and also president of the Albanian American Civic League. He is with me in the studio this morning. You think we should have a role to play?
Absolutely. We have let Mr. Milosevic get away literally with murder. Don't forget, this didn't start last year. It started in 1989 when he walked in with tremendous military force and brutality to take away the autonomy of this province of Kosovo, which is made up of 92% ethnic Albanian and less than 5% Serbian. It had its own self-government. It had its own school system. Everything about it was separate. And then he literally took it over, and all Albanians were fired from their jobs. So there's been a human rights record, second to none in brutality, certainly since the Nazi regime of World War II. And our State Department has known this. And why we let this go for 10 years is beyond me. And why Mr. Holbrooke did not allow the Albanians to sit at the Dayton Accord so that we could deal with this issue of Kosovo at the time we settled Bosnia, which is not quite settled, as you know, is beyond me.
So you are not a fan of Richard Holbrooke and his negotiating style either?
Not at all. I think that his book is his version of the peace, and the peace does not exist. We have 8,000 troops still left in Bosnia, and they were supposed to be there for 1 year, and it's cost us over $8 billion so far, and now we have the legacy of that failed process, Kosova.
Well, some people would say that Bosnia is a perfect example of why we should not get involved this time, because we do have those 8,000 troops that President Clinton promised us would be out in a year, still there.
No, and they have performed admirably well. No, Bosnia is a reason why we should be in Kosova, because we moved 2 years too late in Bosnia. For the same reasons we diddled and dawdled now, we did then, and we lost 250,000 innocent civilians. And you can see the money that it's cost us. If we wait any longer in Kosova, as the president has said very clearly, you can't imagine the cost that this will be to Europe and the United States to quell this. Bosnia did not have the potential of spilling over into Macedonia and bringing two NATO allies against each other, that's Turkey and Greece. So we have to cut this off now, otherwise, unlike Bosnia, we could have a full-fledged European war.
A lot of Americans have sort of grown accustomed to the notion that U.S. air power, or maybe NATO air power in this case, could go in and make some surgical strikes and never lose a plane. I mean, that's the way it's been going in Iraq lately. This is a very different place. Milosevic has a very formidable air defense system. It is likely that American or NATO pilots would be shot down. What would you say to the parents of a pilot who might go missing in action or maybe even be killed carrying out some kind of a bombing campaign?
Well, no one wants to see one U.S. soldier die in any of these conflicts, but there is something that the United States stands for, and it's freedom around the world. You have now in Belgrade the last vestiges of Stalinist communism. You have Mr. Milosevic still hanging on to the most brutal form of Stalinism. He controls absolutely everything, the media, the schools, the armies. He has brutalized the people, and we need to deal with this now.
Congressman Joseph DioGuardi, thanks very much.
Let's try to get a little bit more understanding of the history of this problem. Joining us now is Nebojša Vujović. He is the charge d'affaires of the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. And Joe DioGuardi is a lobbyist for Albanian American issues and heads the Albanian American Civic League. He is also a former congressman from the state of New York. Welcome to both you gentlemen.
Thank you.
Before we get into the history, Mr. Vujović, you said, I believe it was on the op-ed page of USA Today today, that the agreement that was reached at Rambouillet, France, which NATO wants Milosevic to sign, is a fraud, that there is nothing for him to sign. What do you mean?
Yeah, this is a great fraud, and no agreement has been reached in Rambouillet. Neither the talks in Paris really conveyed. What happened is that Albanians signed unilaterally their wish list containing their separatist aspirations. Our delegation wanted to meet with the Albanians directly so that they could reach comprehensive political agreement and then to implement this kind of agreement. But unfortunately that never happened because Albanians really didn't want to engage in a serious talks. Their tactics was to stall the talks and to create NATO military aggression against Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. That is fraud on a grand scale. A NATO military assault against sovereign nation of Yugoslavia would also represent aggression against the Charter of UN, against the final act of Helsinki, of the OSCE, and would be completely and absolutely unjustifiable.
Mr. DioGuardi?
Well, the Albanians certainly didn't get their wish list at Rambouillet. They had to back off on many things, and they did it under great pressure from the United States of America. But what you've just heard is typical Serb propaganda, and they've been saying this for years. You know, we keep hearing that this is an ethnic conflict with religious overtones. What we really have to see here is what happened in 1989. The Albanians were the first to declare themselves for democracy from the former communist state of Yugoslavia. In 1989, 700,000 Albanians threw their Communist Party cards in the bonfire. And that's what started their problem with Slobodan Milosevic, because he's the last vestige of Stalinist communism in Europe. He controls everything. He controls the entire system in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, the press, the universities, the army. He fires people when he wants, and he controls the message. And he has programmed all of his officials with the same message. Look at the outrageous statement made yesterday by one of his officials when they asked about the refugees, and he said, well, that was one Albanian family taking a walk in the park when we saw the villages being torched and the kids and the people being executed. This is the kind of regime that has to be removed from Europe today. I congratulate President Clinton for the wonderful case he made. I'm a Republican, and I congratulate him for the wonderful case he made to the American people, and he's right. We have an interest there. We need a Europe that's united, free, and prosperous. That affects all of us. And one last thing, Bobby. I am a volunteer president of the Albanian American Civic League. It is a registered lobby, but we're all volunteers. And we represent the concerns and interests of 400,000 Albanian Americans. Imagine, we have in America 400,000 Albanians, and they are not far removed from what's going on there. Their families are being killed, and we have a big interest in this.
May I respond?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I'm not a propagandist. I'm a Serb who was born and raised in Kosovo and whose family was forced to flee Kosovo in 1966 because we've been exposed to ethnic cleansing of grand proportions. Kosovo and Metohija just 3 decades ago were a mixed community where the Serbs constitute 50% of population. Unfortunately, due to the terror and to the cleansing of the Albanian politicians 3 decades long, even my family was forced to flee to Kraljevo, a town in Serbia which we used to call Little Kosovo, because we've been exposed to this kind of situation.
Bobby?
Let me let Mr. Vujovic finish real quick, and then I'll have you respond, and then we have to go to break. Go ahead.
So it's not about the regime in Serbia. Kosovo is a cradle of the Serbian nation and of Serbian civilization. For Serbs, Kosovo is what Jerusalem is for the Jews. So no bombing campaign could force us to quit Kosovo, because no politician and no government, no Serbian nation can accept that.
Go ahead.
Well, Bobby, this is total Serbian propaganda. I cannot vouch for the family situation, and I'll have to accept that. But what you've heard is a total lie. This part of the Balkans, Kosova, was part of the state of Albania that came out of the Ottoman Empire on November the 28th, 1912. That's why you have so many Albanians there. The Albanians are the only indigenous people in the Balkans. They've been there for 10,000 years. The Serbs came from the Ukraine. They came from Russia 600 AD. When they talk about this mythical battle in 1389, sure, it was a battle that they lost. They fought side by side with Christian Albanians. All Albanians were Christians before the Ottoman Turks came in, but you'll never hear that from the Serbs, because they've been programmed by the Stalinist communist system that they have. I mean, this gentleman may be a good man, but I can tell you he's been programmed very well.
Ian, in the who's going first here?
Sterling.
Sterling and Ian. Okay.
Well, it appears that Mr. Milosevic is he's just disagreeing with what NATO says. And as a 14-year-old child, I know that if I was doing this to my parents, they would probably send me to my room and punish me until I was ready to talk like a reasonable person. And so that's what I think what we should do to Milosevic.
Let me respond to that. Mr. Milosevic is a democratically elected president of first of Serbia and now the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. And President Milosevic was not a bad boy of the Balkans, as the Congresswoman stated a few moments ago. He is not only democratically elected president of Yugoslavia, but he is also a cornerstone of the Dayton Peace Agreement reached in Ohio. So he is a factor of peace and stability in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He put his signature behind this agreement. So he is doing best to implement the agreement in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Just look the record.
Well, how does he have this reputation then?
I don't know. This is I think that the people completely simplified the situation on the Balkans. They've been accusing Serbia of trying to overreach or to dominate other Yugoslav republics. But Serbia only had a legitimate interest to think about the interests of the Serbs living in the other republics who've been turning into minority overnight and whose interest has been gravely abused.
Well, first let me say that there's hardly democracy in Belgrade when you saw a prominent general being fired just for merely disagreeing, a prominent university professor of the law school there being fired. There is no democracy, so I would not refer to him as a democratically elected president. As a matter of fact, 100,000 and more Serbs are on the streets of Belgrade because of the elections being fixed, and it wasn't until he turned around and changed the election result that they then, there was peace. But you have here a terrible situation. You've got a man, Slobodan Milosevic, and the world can't be wrong. He's been indicted by the U.S. House of Representatives last September, the U.S. Senate last June, the European Parliament last September, all said in unanimous resolutions that for his actions, brutal actions, genocide, ethnic cleansing in Bosnia and Kosovo, he should be brought to The Hague and tried as a war criminal. I don't see why we're even talking to this man, why Mr. Holbrooke's wasting his time. What interest does the United States have in negotiating a peace with a war criminal? That's what he is. Everybody cannot be wrong.
Mr. DioGuardi, can this conflict, it is a long-standing civil war, can it be solved without military action, outside military action, and without the removal? It sounds to me a few moments ago you were, between the lines, espousing the removal of Mr. Milosevic.
No, it can't, because this is not just a recent action. You have to go back to 1989, when Mr. Milosevic walked into Kosovo and brutally took away its autonomy. Under the Constitution of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, 1946, and amended in 1974, Kosovo was considered a separate territory, autonomous, and it had an equal vote to Serbia. This is a fact. It had an equal vote to Serbia in the former Yugoslavia. In fact, every 8 years, the president of Yugoslavia was an Albanian. It had its own parliament. It had its own self-administration, own police force, own courts, own school system, own hospitals. Milosevic came in, and in one fell swoop, with a gun to the head of every Albanian parliamentarian, took that away.
Well, you know what, with all due respect, that was then, this is now.
Well, but
can the
point
two
is,
sides make
yes,
it work?
Well, it can't, because we saw what he did in Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia. We acted 2 years too late in Bosnia, and we lost 250,000 people. Only after we struck with our force from the air did Milosevic come to the peace table at Dayton. The same has to happen now. It's the only thing he understands. In fact, he has painted himself in a corner. He knows he can't give up Kosovo without losing his power in Belgrade, so he is willing to take the strikes now to keep that power. It's the only way he'll give up Kosovo.
And our thanks to Nebojša Vojević, and Joe DioGuardi. Thank you both for joining us on Talkback Live this afternoon. Joining us from Cleveland is John Petkovic, a journalist and first-generation Serbian-American. Also in New York with us, Shirley Cloyes, Balkan Affairs Advisor to the Albanian American Civil League. So let me first get reaction from the two of you on the airstrikes today. John?
Well, I think that they're bad for America and for Serbia, because I think it's a violation of international law. I think it violates the UN Charter, and it violates even the NATO Charter. And I think what Clinton is doing is going in there saying, we're going to bomb you, but we're not declaring war so that we can put our peacekeepers on the ground. And meantime, he's hoping that Milosevic will give in. And the problem is, the question is not about Milosevic giving in. Milosevic may not have support by all the Serbs, but Kosovo is a part of Serbia, and I think that the Serbs will never give it up.
Shirley?
No one is happy about bombing, of course, but this bombing, tragically, is long overdue. Albanians have been under a brutal occupation for 10 years in Kosovo, and we all know what has happened for the past year, and it's a very welcome sign that we're finally saying in the international community that we're going to stop Slobodan Milosevic's genocidal war across Europe. And I want to comment on this issue of violation of international law related to territorial integrity. It's well established by the Helsinki Accord and other international conventions that respect for territorial integrity goes hand in hand with the respect of a nation towards human rights, and especially in the case of ethnic minorities, although Albanians don't like that term, by the way. They're more than 90% of the population of Kosovo. But when that respect for rights are denied and on approaching the scale of genocide, then no international law or legal scholar will tell you that territorial integrity is what is important.
Is this going to become American policy in the future, as well as this reaction to specifically this situation?
Could I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
You know, the problem is this, is that once they go in there and they're going to tell them, they expect, the American calculation here is that Milosevic, after a few days of bombing, will say no, well, I'll give in, no more, please, and they'll let American troops in there. Now, why should American troops then go in as peacekeepers after they've just been bombing a country? I mean, there's no logic to that, and it's going to mean that they're going to be there for years, or they're going to be picked up one by one. And, you know, the country has, Any sovereign country has a legitimate right to defend itself from occupiers. And after bombing the Serbs for days, and if NATO goes in, they will be an occupation force. And according to all norms, they would have a right to defend themselves against the occupier. Why should American troops be put in that situation? I really don't understand that.
I was really, Shirley, I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
Yeah, may I respond to this?
Yes.
If you want to talk about occupiers, then again, I think we have to talk about the occupation of Kosova by Serbia for the past 10 years in violation of international law has been the most brutal occupation in Europe since the Nazi era. And what we've seen with Slobodan Milosevic, from Slovenia to Croatia to Macedonia to Bosnia to Kosova, and by the way, he began his war in Kosova on a platform of anti-Albanian racism. What we've seen is a march across Europe in a quest for greater Serbia that has caused already in Bosnia the deaths of 300,000, 2 million refugees, and now we all know about the carnage and tragedy in Kosova. If this march were allowed to be continued, not only would we have a Balkan regional war, but we would have a wider European conflict. So I think it's very premature to talk about troops in Kosova right now, but it is not premature to say the international community has a moral obligation to stop the spread of genocide, and the questioner before was very right to mention the genocide in Rwanda. We're quiet about it. Hopefully we won't be. We have an international war crimes tribunal that is to bring the perpetrators of the massacre in Rwanda and also the perpetrators of the massacre in Kosova and Bosnia to the Hague for trial and indictment. And we must pursue this.
Well, I know that Serbs in this country and elsewhere are very angry about the way they are portrayed in the press, that they, well, frankly, have a public relations problem. They always seem to come off as the bad guy, as the aggressor. Is that justified?
Where were the newspapers to write about Serbs that have been attacked over the weekend, 4 Serb policemen? Where were they to be talking about 100 villages that have been cleaned, small villages in Kosovo over the last 6 months? They weren't there because it does not play into the Clinton administration's notion of black versus white. By doing that, they can create a black versus white picture, demonize the Serbs, say it's all about Slobodan Milosevic, go in there and bomb. They're bombing Slobodan Milosevic, not bombing the Serbian people, of course. It's all nice and clean, and drop some cruise missiles from 2 miles away, kill people, and don't put your boys in harm's way, rewrite the borders of Serbia, destroy Serbia by saying Kosovo is no longer part of Serbia, say that the Bosnian Serbs do not have a right to self-determination, though the Albanians do. I mean, and it's really a one-sided policy that's, in the end, bad for America because it ignores reality up there.
Ralph?
Bobby, let me just comment on that in this way, and that is to say that I think Slobodan Milosevic, he may recognize this himself, may have missed a boat some years ago. He decided that he was not going to make his own case to the world, and you'll notice you don't see very many interviews with Mr. Milosevic. That's not because we're not asking. We've asked many, many times for an opportunity to talk with him. He controls the news media in his own country and uses the news media to portray his actions, the actions of his government, in a certain way. He has not taken advantage of the opportunity CNN and other news organizations would provide to allow him to explain his own policies to the world.
John, how much support does he have within Serbia?
He has, within his own elite, his wife has an elite that rules much of the government, but amongst the population. But, you know, by bombing Serbia, it only destroys any notion of an opposition because they're saying they're bombing Milosevic. They're not bombing
Shirley,
Milosevic.
let me get a final word from Shirley.
May I come on that? When 100,000 Serbs a week in Belgrade demonstrated a few years ago to bring down Milosevic, no one helped them. And we now have to support the Serbian democratic forces. We should not certainly demonize the Serbian people. But Mr. Milosevic has succeeded not only in destroying ethnic Albanians, but destroying a democracy, controlling the media and the universities. That's why we don't know about the opposition.
All right, I'm sorry. That is all the time we have. Thanks to all of our guests. Stay with CNN as we continue our coverage of the NATO attack with Lou Waters and Natalie Allen. We'll see you tomorrow.
It seems only a matter of time before NATO airstrikes rain down on Kosovo and some lawmakers are questioning whether President Clinton is the right man to be leading our military. We're joined by retired Army Colonel David Hackworth and former New York Congressman Joseph DioGuardi, the president of the Albanian American Civic League. Good to have you both on. Your first time, Congressman.
Yes.
And Colonel, good to see you once again.
Yeah, hi, buddy.
And I think we agree about some of this, actually.
Yeah,
because
I was surprised some of the
I'm
things
not
you
sure
said.
we should be going in. I don't know what our strategic interests are, as Sean points out. So maybe my first question would be to you, Congressman, because you favor this. What are we going to accomplish, and what's our exit strategy? No, we need one.
If we don't do something now, we will lose total credibility. The United States, NATO, we have let a two-bit dictator run us into the ground. How many times can we accept, well,
United States?
Yeah, promises. How many promises has he made? Holbrooke's been there, Dayton Peace Accords, and by the way, he listened to Milosevic and kept the Albanians away from the table at Dayton, and that sowed the seeds of the problem we got right now. And how many times in between did Milosevic say he was going to do something and didn't do it?
If we go in and we embolden the guerrillas by our president, can that lead to more bloodshed, possibly?
Bad war. We shouldn't go there.
We're there.
It is not wag the dog. It's going to be known as Clinton Cemetery.
I know you don't believe it's wag the dog, do you?
I don't. No, I say it's not wag the dog. It's going to be known as Clinton Cemetery. There's no reason for it. Military power will eventually prevail, but the American people have to understand they are going to pay an incredible price. Let me ask you something, Congressman. Would you go there and fight?
Let me say this.
I'm asking you a question, yes or no?
I mean, if I
would you send your son?
Excuse me.
Would you send your son?
What does this
because
country
that's
stand
the problem.
for? What does this country stand for?
It doesn't stand for being...
This is a mindless dictator who has killed thousands of people already.
Right. It doesn't
and we're going to let him just go and keep doing this?
It doesn't stand for jumping into every swamp in town. In my life, for the last 53 years, that's what we've been doing. I started out there 53 years ago fighting Serbian soldiers. I fought them for 4 years. One thing that most people don't understand in this country is we don't understand our enemy. That was our mistake in Vietnam. That was our mistake in...
Congressman, if we go in here...
Well, let me say something, because this is important. Do you know what the Kosovo Liberation Army is? It's a homegrown group of people that wants to defend the villages, their people. No one came to their defense. They would want to defend, they're willing to die for freedom. Why don't we arm them?
Well, Congressman, I wanted to ask you a question.
They're being armed, and I should think that much of the arms comes from the drug business, Congressman.
Where did you get that from?
From very good sources.
What, the Serbian
lobby? Let me jump in. Congressman, I want to go back to Colonel Hackworth's question, if I can, here for just a second. And that is, would you send your son, would you go fight over there? And how do you explain to the mothers and fathers of American servicemen that may come home in body bags why did their son or daughter give up their life?
Well, let me say this. If we don't do it now, and the president has made this case to the American people, you can be sure that many more soldiers will have to be committed to this thing.
All right,
and maybe
here's another solution.
Way.
What about, we talked earlier about the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and the Nicaraguan freedom fighters, the Contras against the Sandinistas. Let me ask you, the Kosovo Liberation Army, what about giving them the munitions and the money and let them fight their own battle? And you support that?
Absolutely. Well, why haven't we done
what do you
that?
think,
It
Colonel?
would be over with in 5 minutes.
Excuse me. They are willing to die for freedom. Nobody has come to their support.
It would be no match one-on-one with Kosovo freedom fighters. Ridiculous.
Okay,
what
you're a military strategist.
What needs to be done is in place the United Nations, much as we did in Cyprus, much as my regiment and British regiments did for 9 years over the Trieste issue. We stayed there. We kept the Serbs away.
Colonel. No, I don't want to interrupt, but what I want to ask you is because you
has the potential of causing a European war. This can spill into Macedonia.
Here's what we know presently. 40,000 troops that are armed, that have been involved in civil conflict, that have a greater interest than any U.S. troops that may eventually end up on the ground there. Colonel, you've been to this terrain. It's mountain terrain. It's not like Iraq. Surgical strikes aren't going to work.
Terrible weather, low ceilings.
Give us the military.
Against a very, very determined force.
Congressman, Congressman, wait a minute. Based on what he's saying,
very dangerous.
Based on what he's saying, talking about the terrain, talking about 40,000 dug in, and my military experts, Colonel, you back me up, tell me you need a 10-to-1 ratio.
3 to 1.
3 to 1? Okay,
yeah.
3 to 1. Then we're talking about 120,000 U.S. troops minimum to go in there on the ground, ultimately to be successful, based on what he's saying. I mean, is that how far you take this? Do you send U.S. troops on the ground there?
One step at a time. Right now, what we need to do is to take away this man's
capability of hurting the thousands of people he's hurting right now. And that means to take away his military might. He doesn't deserve that kind of sophisticated weaponry. And we can take it out. We've got the sophisticated technology.
Can we do it simply with an airstrike? Is airstrikes going to be enough, or do we have to go in with ground troops?
Phase 1 is airstrikes.
But is Phase 1 going to do it, or do we have to go in again?
We don't know. Right now...
You really think airstrikes alone are going to solve the problem?
Probably not.
So then we have to be prepared to send in ground troops and further risk American lives?
NATO is committed to do this, and we are part of NATO. And we have to contribute our part, 15%.
When you say we, are you talking for the Albanians, or are you talking, for the Americans?
And by the way,
you're willing to witness...
Colonel, there are 400,000 Albanian Americans right here.
So what?
What do you mean? They're part of America, too.
Are you willing to risk American lives to fight a war, which, let me tell you something.
May
I finish? The major lesson of Vietnam was don't get involved in a civil war. Another lesson was make sure... It certainly is.
Kosova has its own government, had its own self-administration, had an equal vote to Serbia. Kosova, in its constitution, had an equal vote to Serbia in the Confederal presidency.
You say 15%. We just saw on the screen we're sending 250 out of 400 aircraft.
Fine.
That is not 15%.
Right.
We're at much greater risk than any of the other.
And that's our strength, intelligence and military technology. That's where
we're taking the greatest risk of any other country.
Well, but we're taking a risk with technology. We know that we have the technology to take out those positions. With no signs that the fightings will subside in Kosovo, NATO gave the green light for airstrikes, which could begin at any moment. Some members of Congress are questioning whether the United States' national interests are at stake. And President Clinton's foreign policy has come under fire before, most recently, over the continued showdown with Iraq. Does President Clinton have the right stuff to lead the military into another conflict? John Kerry, Nebraska, Vietnam vet, in battle himself. I'm very pessimistic we can drive the Serbs out. Pete Domenici, Senator, what we're trying to enforce may not be enforceable. Similar comments. John Kyle, John McCain, Steve Forbes, John Kay, right on down the line. Can you ever, you have more experience, 53 years in and around the military. Have we ever, through bombing, ever won a war?
Not in Germany in World War II, not in Korea, not in Vietnam, not in 8 years of the Gulf activity in Iraq. With only way is a combination of Navy, ground troops, and air. And that means ground troops will come in. I have no question that NATO will prevail. A week or two, they will blow away the air defense, and they will be able to make a forced entry down through Macedonia and put a belt around Kosovo. But then what I worry about is what I experienced for 4 years up on the confrontation on the Trieste border, which was a constant nickel and diming and attacks by the Serbians. The same thing the Germans experienced when they took 700,000 casualties between 40 and 45.
Colonel, let me ask you this, because the President's a student of history, you're a student of history here, and you're bringing out these incredible things. You speak to military people every day. You speak to how many?
At least 500 a day.
At least 500. Yeah. What are they saying about this? And are people suggesting that the President, who now his legacy is Monica Lewinsky, are they telling you that maybe the President, he knows historically through special events, World War I, II, ending the Cold War, that's how they get their legacy. Is he trying to get his legacy back?
I don't know. He's going to go down like LBJ, who wanted to be known as for the Great Society and went down for Vietnam. So maybe Monica will go away and will be remembered as Clinton Cemetery. I think that it's a mistake to go in there. We're committed. The President's been caught in a bluff, and we are going to pay a terrible price. And it's ironic that those people who were the draft dodgers during the Vietnam era, and I'm talking about the National Security Advisors and the President, who are now the ones who are saying, we will commit young men and women to a war that is going to be nothing other than a long-running cesspool.
I agree with you about whether we should be involved in this, but you never miss an opportunity to take a gratuitous slap at President Clinton.
I despise him.
I'm shocked to hear you say that.
But I think he looked pretty good today. I think he made an excellent case to the American people, and I think he's ready to walk the talk.
He is a great slime bag.
Why do you have to degenerate the conversation to that level of rhetoric?
I don't degenerate.
Why do you have to do that?
By the way, the average dumb old American like me thinks.
I mean, I think you're more eloquent than that. I expect more from you than to use Dan Burton-like terms like that. That's not necessary.
He might be very, very smart, and so is McNamara. And look what he brought us. Vietnam, 400,000 casualties.
What I want to know,
let's look at the people who have the responsibility.
We've got to wrap this up, so I've got to ask you one final. How do we get out Let's say we go in, let's say that bombing is successful. Then what do we do?
Well, the thing that we have to do is to get rid of Slobodan Milosevic. There will not be any peace in the Balkans.
We don't go after leaders of other countries.
Well, wait.
We're not the assassination
He's
business.
already gave a speech in December where he told the intelligence community that Milosevic is much too expensive for us. We need to build a democratic opposition and get rid of him.
Congressman DioGuardi, good to see you. Thank you. We'll have you back, I'm sure, as this whole story unfolds.
As promised, we've been telling you about a third day of NATO bombings is now underway. So why is Slobodan Milosevic standing firm? Joining us now with some perspective on all this from Washington, Jonathan Clark of the Serbian Unity Congress. And here in our studio is Joseph DioGuardi, president of the Albanian American Civic League. Gentlemen, welcome. Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
Mr. DioGuardi, we've been talking about the escalating atrocities that have been taking place. NATO is confirming this. The State Department has word that this is taking place, and the White House acknowledges the same. There are those who suggest that this conflict is only making matters worse for the ethnic Albanians. How do you see it?
Umar, it's a shame that it came this far. We saw the Albanian repression for years. Since 1974, there's been virulent anti-Albanian racism by the Serbian people. It's been a very hostile regime for the Albanians. In 1989, Milosevic walked in and took everything away from the Albanians. Now, having said that, we acted just in the nick of time. I have to praise, I'm a Republican, and I praise President Clinton for finally showing our teeth. Because had we waited, as we did in Bosnia, we could have lost, who knows what's happening right now. This is the tragedy. But we lost 250,000 civilians in Bosnia by waiting 2 years. Our president knew that. That's why he acted now. One of the things that we should be considering right now is arming the Kosovo Liberation Army to defend those civilians. We did this in Bosnia. We armed the Croatian forces in Bosnia. It was that, along with the airstrikes, that brought Milosevic to the table. So we don't need to be talking about U.S. ground troops right now. We need to be talking about getting the weapons to the Kosovo Liberation Army, because we know this man by his deeds. He will massacre more and more Albanians. There's a revenge going on right now. I heard this morning 20 teachers were executed in the town of Jakova, literally taken out and executed.
That's a report that remains unconfirmed at this point, but certainly it sounds like a horrific story. Mr. Clark, what do you think? There are those who suggest that no longer can we stay silent on this issue. Obviously, we're involved, but the only way to really make a difference is to arm the resistance movement there.
I think that would be a complete disaster. What we're seeing here is the result of a premature Western intervention. Last week, there were monitors on the ground. The situation was calm, was under control. Now the monitors have been withdrawn. We have essentially lost control of the situation there. And tragedy is definitely taking place. And what we must do is get as back quickly as possible, as the Italians and the Greeks are suggesting, as quickly as possible back to the negotiating table, get back monitors into Kosovo, and then take it from there. That is the way to defuse the crisis. Not, of course, to pour extra, more arms into the region. That would be a recipe for disaster.
At the same time, even with those monitors in place, the atrocities were continuing. So how do you respond to that?
No, they weren't, you see. They were under control. The level of violence was very much reduced. That is a myth, I'm afraid, that the United States is now putting about. Get the monitors back in their place, and then the crisis will be under control.
Let me just ask you, do you think that's propaganda put up by the White House? I know that there are reports from other human rights groups who acknowledge the same and say that this information was correct, that this was taking place despite the monitors.
The Serbian Unity Congress is also receiving reports of civilians being killed. From Dečani Monastery, for example, Father Sava is saying that civilians are being killed by cruise missiles. So long as this situation goes on, there will be no way forward. The best way is to resume peace negotiations, get people back on the ground. That's the way to get the situation under control.
We try this time and time again. Mr. Milosevic has violated every agreement he has made, including the recent one, the ceasefire in October. He put 40,000 troops into Kosovo recently in violation of that agreement with the M84 tanks. And by the way, last summer, over 250 Albanian villages were torched and ethically cleansed. No monitors were allowed into those villages. There may have been tens of thousands of Albanians already killed. So we're not getting the information. I have to disagree with Jonathan.
Mr. Clark, you say that we need to have diplomacy act as the primary force here. At the same time, Mr. Milosevic says there's nothing more to talk about. He does not want to give in and allow for the autonomy of Kosovo. So how do you respond to that? How can there be peace in the region if he won't even engage in negotiations himself?
Now, the Serbian Unity Congress does not speak for Mr. Milosevic at all. But what we are saying, that there are plenty of people of goodwill. Last week in Vienna, there was a meeting, an interfaith meeting. Jewish, Orthodox, Muslim, and Orthodox faiths came together and showed the way that people can work together. These are the sort of forces we should be working with, not simply making Milosevic our partner, not putting him at center stage. There are plenty of other people.
Unfortunately, he is at center stage at this very minute.
Only because he has been put there by the United States and NATO. It is completely unnecessary.
Well, there's an element of truth to that, because we have been against our foreign policy here since we decided to make Slobodan Milosevic, a de facto war criminal, our partner in peace. By giving him a place at the table at Dayton and listening to him by excluding the Albanians. And that's why this crisis is so bad. The Dayton Accords did not include the third largest group in the Balkans, the Albanian people, 7 million people. So there's an element of truth to that. Mr. Holbrooke has that responsibility for making Mr. Milosevic our partner in peace. But now that we know who he is, what he has done, and we've tried everything, including a last-minute trip by Mr. Holbrooke, there was no choice. Otherwise, you would see a civilian massacre on a grand scale, and it's going on right now.
It's unfortunate it is going on right now, and certainly something that we're keeping a close watch on. Gentlemen, I'm sorry we're out of time, but I appreciate you joining us with your insights, and we will be checking back with you in the days ahead.
Welcome to Hannity and Combs. I'm Sean Hannity. Up first tonight, NATO stepped up its airstrikes today, adding Serb ground forces to the list of targets. At the same time, Serbian leader Slobodan Milosevic is showing no signs of backing down. Despite catching an old-fashioned beating by NATO bombers, Serb forces have tightened the screws on ethnic Albanians in Kosovo, and thousands of refugees are running for their lives. Published reports say this took even the White House by surprise. In Washington, President Clinton continues to deny that ground troops would be used in combat. But as each day goes by, is it looking more likely that this war won't be winnable without them? And why wasn't the White House ready for the hundreds of thousands of fleeing refugees? We're joined in studio tonight by retired Army Colonel David Hackworth and former Congressman Joseph DioGuardi. He's the president of the Albanian American Civic League, and by the way, was in New York today, Congressman, protesting in support of what the president's doing, in support of this, burning the Serbian flag.
I tried to burn it. Very difficult to burn.
Is that right? This is your first attempt at burning a flag?
It was symbolic because the Albanian people obviously wanted to make the case that this is not a sovereign state as far as the Albanians are concerned. That Kosova is an independent state already. This has to be recognized.
But Congressman, you're supporting the idea. If we're going to bomb Kosovo and surrounding areas to end genocide, why don't you make the case, and why wouldn't you be critical of the president, that if that is our stated goal and mission, that maybe we have to use military troops and ground forces if it would help? And why are we telegraphing all of this to our enemies anyway?
Well, there's no question. That's what this rally was all about. We had some 10,000 Albanian Americans today that were saying that we need to arm the KLA and that we should do that immediately. We did this to the Croatians in Bosnia. Why can't we do it to the KLA? Let them take out those surface-to-air missiles and the tanks, and then, yes, we got to get on with the next phase, which is to commit the ground troops.
All right, Colonel Hackworth, by the way, that was you at that rally today. I think I saw you in the corner of my eye there. All right, Colonel Hackworth, always good to see you. Welcome back on board. The truth is, the bombing didn't work with Saddam Hussein in the surgical strikes. And how do we define success here? Yeah. There's no inspectors for the biological, chemical programs, nuclear programs. Why is it going to work here? And why would we telegraph that we'll never use ground troops?
I mean, this game is but 5 days into it. Vietnam, we bombed for 9 years until we got the lesson learned that we can't win. So 5 days, I don't think it's any way to talk about, is there an end game, is there a conclusion? What bothers me with my good friend here from New York...
By the way, you didn't have CNN and the internet back in Vietnam.
Well, we had plenty of television there. But what bothers me is that a former United States congressman would burn a Serbian flag. The Serbians were our great allies in World War II, saved a number of our airmen.
Watching how many American flags they've been burning lately?
Why not attack the guy you really want to attack is a leader of Serbia, not the Serbian people.
Yeah,
and I don't think it's appropriate.
We have been doing that for 10 years.
I don't think it's appropriate behavior for a former U.S. congressman to burn another country's flag. If you want to attack Milosevic, great. He's the guy. Get his
We have
picture,
done that for
burn
10
it.
years.
Then you're talking
it's time now
you feel really, yeah, but you feel passionate about this war, right?
Did you see 10,000 people how passionate they
felt? So if you feel so passionate about it, get a rifle, get on an airplane, go there.
Listen,
but I don't want
200 people signed up today, by the way, at that rally to go there.
Congressman DioGuardi,
yes.
That flag, I think the Colonel Hackworth is right. One of the rare statements ever made like that on
cannot believe patriotic Serbs here.
But look, that flag represents not just Milosevic, it represents all these innocent Serbs who are victimized by him.
So
what is burning that flag?
Listen,
what kind
we
of
burned this picture before.
What kind of message does that send to those innocent Serbs?
It sends a good message to the Albanians who are being killed as we speak, executed.
What about the innocent Serbs who are victimized by Milosevic?
They should get rid of Milosevic to restore that flag back to honor. That's the way it goes.
You know it's going to take ground troops. As a matter of fact, over the weekend on one of the Sunday morning shows,
NATO ground troops.
You, Shelton, recalling 60,000 troops were needed in Bosnia, said combating forces in Kosovo, quote, would involve hundreds of thousands of ground troops over a rather protracted period of time and in a very dangerous situation. There's no way we can accomplish this
but
with just
before you
airstrike.
send them in, give the arms to the KLA. Let them do the dirty work. Let them go into the woods and take out those surface air
funded by
missiles.
drug money.
Who
which
said
is a
that?
terrorist force.
You're listening to Tanyug? You're listening to the control press?
You deny that?
Absolutely.
You deny that any drug money goes in?
Absolutely.
Colonel, do you have any evidence to
I don't know where
believe
he's getting his
Yeah,
information.
well, the International European Police Force, they say absolutely. They have evidence, fingerprints, the whole lot. But the bottom line is,
the drug baron is Milosevic. UDBA has infiltrated every Albanian community here trying to deal with
The bottom line
drugs.
here is you're anxious that something to be done here. You're very emotional about it. You're burning flags, and you're a former congressman of my country.
One flag.
And a flag is a flag. The
Hardly
point
burned,
is, if
but
you
it
want
made
to
a
go,
point.
you go. I am not allowing my 21-year-old son to go. No American should go to that land and fight
You're a
and die in
military
that
man.
land.
We started this campaign. Now, NATO's 50th anniversary is coming up. We're about to go into the 21st century, and you want to shut this thing down, having lost?
Well, I think what we need to do is...
Is that the kind of America you want to see go into the 21st century?
We made a mistake getting
We
in.
didn't make a mistake. Listen, this man's been planning since 1937. Here it is. He's got it written out what he wanted to do to the Albanians, page by page by page. Right. We should have known this. So this was not hidden.
Yeah.
Now, if we made the
Congressman, you know what's interesting in terms of Colonel Hackworth saying he wouldn't send his child to go fight that war? Bill Clinton, in an argument in a letter to the draft board back in 1967, said he wouldn't go and fight a war that he felt was an illegal and immoral.
Alan, welcome on board to the right-wing conspiracy.
And yet, you know, here's the guy, or this is where I differ from Bill Clinton, because he objected to Vietnam on the very same grounds that many people are objecting to this war.
I disagree with Bill Clinton. I'm a Republican, right? But on this one, I agree with him. If this were Ronald Reagan, you'd be supporting him.
Hang on a second.
No, wait a minute.
No, I'm against war.
The man has 2 years to go. He's taken every hit and he's still standing.
Hang on, Congressman. And by the way, I'd like to officially welcome Alan Combs to the vast right-wing conspiracy. And thanks for quoting Colonel Holmes' letter.
Wait a minute, why don't I get invited to those vast right-wing conspiracy meetings you go to?
The next one will...
I was excluded. NATO keeps pounding Serb targets, and Slobodan Milosevic remains defiant. Will bombs alone do the trick to bring the Serbs back to the bargaining table? We continue the conversation. You know, given what's happened, Colonel, over the last few days, 5 key ethnic Albanian leaders have been executed, along with hundreds of other Albanians. We've heard about all the refugees, hundreds of thousands of refugees to neighboring countries. That things have gotten a lot worse because of what NATO has done. Because of our involvement in Kosovo, we have these executions, we have these refugees. Not that some of that wouldn't have happened anyway, but it's been exacerbated by what's happened over the last few days.
Perhaps, but you know, life for Albanians has been miserable since 1974 at least, and certainly since the occupation in 1989. You can't imagine the barbarity of the Serbian regime against the Albanians. They were doing it already. You're now seeing a lot more because of the action.
All right, Congressman, I want to ask, first of all, we have no definition of success in this mission. None. We don't know, we're never going to be able to go to the American people and say we've been successful because we did A, B, C, or D. There's no end game. There's no exit strategy. There's no definition of what we're doing here. If our goal is to end genocide, if the president's comparing Milosevic to Hitler, then why would you put any impediment in the way to prevent him from accomplishing the goal of eliminating him.
There shouldn't be any impediment.
But so that, in other words, you support sending the 21-year-old boys that Colonel Hackworth was referring to
NATO ground forces at some point will be committed. There's no question about that.
Now, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
And we are part of NATO.
The administration is denying that U.S. forces will be there, but Colonel Hackworth, you said something during the break that why is there a U.S. general in Macedonia if that is not tipping off that they really plan this administration to put ground troops in
with the headquarters. Now, when you have a general in the field with headquarters, then you must assume that troops are coming. I can remember 1964, Lyndon Johnson said, no American soldiers will fight in Vietnam. That's an Asian soldier war. And a year later, my brigade went to Vietnam, and in the year that we were there, we lost 400 dead and 4,000 wounded.
So the president's lying to us. You're both agreeing on that point.
I think, well, the president says, I have no intentions. Watch out for Bill Clinton.
Well,
that's a
true.
weasel
How do you
word.
define it?
How do you define is? How do you define sex?
Well, you're saying, Congressman,
why should he telegraph that anyway?
Congressman, what you're saying then is the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense Cohn, that the President and all his national security people, when they've all been on the Sunday programs and they're all denying categorically that U.S. troops are going to be used on the ground, you're admitting you think it's a lie, and you think the strategy of the administration is, in fact, to put 21-year-old men and women in harm's way in Kosovo to fight a war there.
Wouldn't it be crazy for them to telegraph what they're going to do in the field?
I think it's outrageous that the president lies to us, myself. I don't want to hear a lie again.
But why do we need all this military information? Let them win the thing and then come back to us.
If it's to end genocide, he should do all of that.
Okay, let me just jump in here. First of all,
Colonel,
the
hold up.
military...
We got to take a break. We promise to come right to you when we come back.
All right, Colonel.
We'll take your calls when we come back as well. And then they call him the butcher of the Balkans, but is Slobodan Milosevic really the monster everyone says he is? Please stay with us on Hannity and Cohn.
Kinds of atrocities that are being reported are so outrageous that they really ought to make very clear to the American people why we did this. NATO had to do this in order to stop these mounting atrocities.
This past weekend, anti-American protests were held all over the world as President Clinton alienating some of our important allies with this war in Kosovo. Right now, we continue our discussion with retired Army Colonel David Hackworth and former Congressman Joseph DioGuardi, who is the president of the Albanian American Civic League. Colonel, I want to send it to you, and this question that was just raised here about we keep hearing about atrocities, the president and vice president, comparisons to Hitler. And Congressman, I mean, I don't want to minimize the loss of one life, ethnic cleansing, but in the last year, 2,000 people, according to all published reports now, all published reports are saying 2,000 people were killed in this civil conflict battle in Kosovo.
250 villages were torched, and not one observer was allowed into those villages last summer.
All right, now I'm going to open this. I'm not going to contradict what you're saying, but I'm going to ask Colonel Hackworth. Certainly, it is not an accurate comparison to say this is like Adolf Hitler.
What we've got going on all sides. On your side, you're a very big propagandist for the Albanians, and Clinton and Gore and Albright are propagandists, and the Serbians are propagandists. The bottom line is we're in a fight, and the fight has just begun, and I think that Bill Clinton got caught in a bluff that he thought, I will use air and you'll give up, and the Serbs didn't. Now he's used air and they haven't given up. So the next thing is we got to use ground forces, but you just can't grab a bunch of soldiers and throw them in. It took us 6 months to get ready to deploy forces into Desert Storm. It is going to take us at least that long.
Why do we arm the Croatians in Bosnia?
It will take probably, in order to build an army, the Bosnian army or the Albanian army, it'll take at least 10 years. What I'm saying is there's some really shaky military thinking going on that has created this mess, and this quagmire is just going to get deeper and deeper.
Congressman, nation building didn't work in Somalia. Destabilization is happening now in Haiti. We tried democratization. That didn't work. We tried to keep things together in Bosnia. That's fallen apart. What makes us think that given all these failures we've had, that all of a sudden this exercise is going to work for us?
Well, none
of the others have.
There are some things that we just can't turn our eyes from. When someone
we said that in Haiti.
is going through the heart of Europe, but don't forget, this is an area just above Macedonia We know that we have 2 NATO allies that are already at each other's throats, and Macedonia could bring them both together again in opposite, against each other, Turkey and Greece. You can't let this thing.
And then what
go
happens
any
when we're
further
done? When we're
than it
done,
is.
we leave. Remember when the Britons left the Sudan and everything fell apart? What happens when we leave here?
Well,
the same thing. How long are we prepared to stay in this part of the globe?
If we declare that we recognize an independent Kosova, I believe the Albanian people, as they did for many years when Kosova was an equal part of that confederal presidency, they had their own parliament. They had their own police force. They had their own everything.
And we can just walk away and act like we don't even have to be there, and that's going to happen. Democratization is going to take place.
You don't have
it didn't happen in Haiti. It didn't happen in Somalia. Why would it happen here?
Because I think the Albanian people are smart enough to put back the infrastructure they need to rule themselves.
So we don't need American involvement. Could that possibly be the case?
No,
we
not
just
at
walk
all.
away
Well, I think
from
what we need to do is we need to do what we didn't do in Vietnam and declare victory and come home before we send in troops. My experience
You're going to declare this a victory?
Boots follow bombs. And if we keep going on as we are, we're going to have our troops stuck in there, and then it's a nightmare. I say, let's get out and let's
And I
get
say
out
20,000 Kosovo Liberation Army individuals should be armed and let them do some dirty work. They're willing to do it. They're willing to die for freedom. Let them do that before we commit our NATO.
Let's go to
the biggest thugs in Europe.
Oh, please.
We'll go to our phones. We'll start in Texas. We'll check in with Dave on the Fox News channel, Hannity and Combs. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you guys doing?
Terrific. Glad you called, sir.
Yes, sir. Hey, I called out to make a little bit of a comparison with what's going on with this military thing over in Kosovo.
Right.
It seems like we're trying to kill an ant bed. We're running around killing all the ants, and we're not even getting to the main point, which is the queen, which is producing more ants faster than we can kill them.
Well, you know, Dave, you raise a great point. We talked about this the last time you were on, Colonel Hackworth. That, of course, would be, why do we have an executive order that prevents assassination? I don't care if it's Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, Milosevic. You know what? It would certainly make
this whole trip is Milosevic. If he's gone, this is the end of it. There's 2 ways he's going to go. He gets whacked, a bomb drops on him, or his own army explodes internally. And
let me ask one other question on this, though. Let me ask one other question, though, because now we're in a situation where the Pentagon and the President warned us that, in fact, they have SA-6s. We had the stealth bomber come down. Nobody thought it was going to be possible. Came down over the weekend. Thank God they were able to pull out this pilot safely. These guys have the ability to fight back. This is not going to be a cakewalk. This is not going to be...
if it continues and goes to daylight, it's going to get nastier and nastier, and I'm afraid our casualties are going to get heavier and heavier.
You're talking about Serbia versus the United States of America and NATO, and you're worried about losing this one?
You're worried about body bags coming home.
Not want to have
I'm worried about boys coming home.
Right, but we've got the technology. Let's use it.
John in New York. Hi, welcome.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Go ahead.
I've discussed this with my friends today at work, and we believe that Clinton is using this as an ability to boost the ratings of the DNC in the upcoming 2000 elections.
Well, that is, John, that doesn't make a lot of sense given that there's people are 50-50 split on this. This is not, one thing you can say about Clinton doing this is not a popular move for Bill Clinton. He can't be doing this to boost either his ratings or the ratings of the Democratic National Committee. I mean, certainly this is not good for his favorability.
Normally the polls go up when a president is into war. In this case, the polls are going down.
But we knew that going in. This is not done for. I want to get back to this issue of executive order. Certainly, you favor a removal of that executive order that Reagan had.
Look, if
so
you
we go and we kill leaders of foreign nations.
If you took out Saddam Hussein, end of that problem. If you took out
we shouldn't be in the assassination.
End of that problem. Hey,
it makes our own.
What do you think those bombs are doing?
Wouldn't that make our own leaders more vulnerable to do that?
What do you think's happening to the Albanians?
Wouldn't that make our own leaders more vulnerable to attack from terrorists?
You remember what a few well-placed bombs did to Mr. Gaddafi?
That's
you remember?
Right. Bingo.
But it makes respond to the fact that it encourages terrorism. It makes our own leaders more vulnerable. If we go after
I think what it demonstrates is our resolve to get rid of thugs like this, and then the other ones
never works.
Do not.
We missed Gaddafi. It didn't work. We didn't get him.
He
made him awfully quiet.
It was neutralized.
We're almost out of time. Colonel, you're going to be leaving us. Congressman, you'll be staying. I want to ask you very quickly. Russia kicked out NATO officials. We know Boris Yeltsin threatened the use of force. They're also going to be using humanitarian aid to Yugoslavia. What's the Russian connection here?
Thousands of Russians are volunteering across the land. Russia's, I'm sure, going to provide supplies. They say only humanitarian, but I have to tell you, tomorrow the Prime Minister arrives, and who's he bringing with him? His Minister of Defense.
Colonel, always good to see you, buddy. Thank you. We'll see you later in the week. That's it. Thank you, Colonel Hackworth. Congressman Stays coming up next. Also, Colonel Bob McGinnis will be up next. And the Serbs have been blamed for deadly acts of ethnic cleansing. But are we only getting one side of the story? That's all part of our debate, and the Russian connection all coming up.
We are going to continue this air campaign. It'll be intensified. We are going to move into a wider array of targets, including not only those dealing with command and control structures, ammunition dumps, but also start to go after the forces in the field.
Welcome back to Hannity and Combs. I'm Alan Combs. Operation Allied Force moved into its second phase, and NATO says the bombing is, quote, a long way from being over. If airstrikes were supposed to stop Serb leader Slobodan Milosevic's reign of terror in Kosovo, it appears they've so far failed. Serbian forces have reportedly stepped up the violence, forcing thousands of Albanian refugees to flee. So is bombing helping or hurting the situation? And are the Serbs really the murderers people say they are? In Washington, James Hooper, the executive director of the Balkan Action Council. Here in New York, retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, director of the Military Readiness Project at the Family Research Council. Staying with us is former Congressman Joseph DioGuardi, the president of the Albanian American Civic League. Colonel McGinnis, welcome back. Good to see you in person this time on Hannity and Combs. Isn't this how World War II got started back in 1914? Foreign countries going into the Balkans to further cause an already heated conflagration.
Well, I don't know if the Balkans are really the cause of World War II. Certainly,
World War
it's
I,
questionable.
World War I.
You know, you had a series of alliances with Russia, Hungary, and Austria going into kind of get involved in an ethnic battle in the Balkans. So I think it's more of an alliance military tension type of situation rather than a cause.
Don't we risk further endangering the area by getting other countries involved? Refugees now already fleeing to neighboring countries, and who knows how long it might be before these neighboring countries could be involved.
Well, that's true, Alan, but in fact we have 10,000 troops right now in Bosnia, so I don't think Milosevic has any desire to invade Bosnia. After all, we just kicked him out 5 years ago. That's why we had the Dayton Accord. And also Macedonia, we have 10,000 troops. So I really don't think Milosevic is interested in anything other than retaining Kosovo, which has been part of Yugoslavia since 1918. It's like one of our states breaking off from the United States.
James Hooper, if that's true, why does NATO belong there?
NATO's there for three reasons. First, to stop the genocide that's taking place. Secondly, to prevent this conflict from spilling over and creating a broader regional conflict. And third, because NATO is committed to enforcing the ceasefire there. Mr. Milosevic signed an agreement with U.S. Special Envoy Richard Holbrooke last October that committed NATO to keep the peace, to enforce the ceasefire. If NATO backed down from this, as it had actually from several earlier threats last year, it would have been the end of NATO's credibility and, frankly, the end of the credibility of the United States.
Right. Colonel, let me bring you in. By the way, we're going to talk about history. The only time war came out of the Balkans in 1914 was when the big powers went in. There was war there in 1912 and 1913 when the big powers stayed out. You didn't have World War I, correct?
Right,
historically speaking. All right. I want to ask you something. That we had this stealth bomber shot out of the sky. Right. Thank God they were able to get this pilot.
How did that happen?
What?
How did that happen?
Well, you know, they're supposed to be able to pick up one stealth.
I mean, how did it get shot out of the sky?
Well, that's a good question. But my question is, we see these people dancing and little kids getting their picture taken on top of our stealth bomber. Do we have any risk to our national security that some of that technology is now going to be stolen and handed over to Russia and any of these other countries, or they have it already?
Yeah, well,
they got it from the Chinese.
They probably got it from the Chinese. You know, when we shot all those missiles into Sudan last August, two of those were duds, and of course they ended up in Chinese hands. So we can now buy cruise missiles at a discount from the Chinese.
Right.
So those are the things that we risk by playing games like this in cases where it's really not.
So, Colonel, you are saying that there is a significant case to be made that there will be a transfer of stealth technology by this plane being either shot down, however it actually came down.
Well, you know, I'm sure it's going to go to the highest bidder. Milosevic is a good businessman, and if the Chinese are in the market, which they probably are, they'll pay for it.
But you know, he said that Kosovo was part of Serbia, since 1914. Do you know where it was before 1914?
Nowhere, Congressman.
It was part of Albania. It was part of the state of Albania that came out of the Ottoman occupation on November the 28th, 1912. So how do you believe the Serbs that this is their Jerusalem? You know what they should bomb? They should bomb the information capacity of Mr. Milosevic, the lies from Tanjug. They should drop a bomb on that TV station.
Well, you'd like to see that. Maybe eventually
Why not?
they will. Listen, I'm going to say
the lies are incredible.
If you were to believe the president, we'll throw this to Colonel McGinnis. I asked you this in the last half hour. If you were to believe that genocide is being committed, there's some debate going back and forth about whether or not the numbers, the comparisons to Hitler are accurate, fair, and just, or is it hyperbole to get American support. But if it is genocide, if it really is, and that case is compelling, then the president ought not telegraph that he's not going to use ground forces, and he ought to just go in and clean it up and get it over with, no?
Yeah, the Colin Powell doctrine is two parts. You go in there with everything you have to win. And if you don't know how you're going to get out, don't go in to begin with.
There is no end game here.
There's no end game.
James Hooper, I'll ask you this. I was flabbergasted that the administration did not even anticipate the scope of the Serbian attack against the ethnic Albanians as a result of the NATO attack against them. There was no provisions made to set up any refugee camps, no attempt to assist these people. Do these people in the Pentagon and White House know what they're doing here, James? What's going on?
Well, I think the question is, how do we stop this genocide that's taking place now? And I think there are a couple of things that have to be done. First, the administration has to lift the restrictions, the targeting restrictions that they have placed on NATO bombing. For example, NATO cannot strike at any target in Serbia or in Kosovo that is within 1,500, where within 1,500 feet of that target, there might be a building where there are civilians located.
James, let me ask you one question.
For example, the Ministry of Interior in Belgrade cannot be hit.
But my only point about my question was, are we now hurting by almost instigating Serbian atrocities and aggression towards the ethnic Albanians because of the NATO attacks? Are we hurting the very people we purport to help in this whole crisis?
No, this ethnic cleansing was underway last year. The war began in late February of last year.
But now they're leaving town, and they're refugees all over the place.
Yes, but they had driven out over 500,000 ethnic Albanians from their homes before the ceasefire in October, killing over 2,000 people, destroying over 20,000 homes, and over 490 villages.
You know, if we lift some of those restrictions, Colonel McGinnis, aren't we going to kill more civilians? This is going to be less popular war. We're going to be in more trouble. It's going to be more of a disaster if we do that.
At least 20% of the cruise missiles miss their target, Alan. And if you try to shoot too close to civilian population, you're going to kill civilians. If you drop B-1 bombs, if you bought bombs out of B-52s, and you take A-10s, they're pretty accurate, but they aren't accurate enough to keep from killing civilians.
We're in a box here. If we play this to win, we kill innocent civilians. If we don't, it drags on and on and on. Either way, it's a disaster.
Well, I think if the Serbian people saw that they were losing a lot of their sons and daughters and relatives, they might be putting some pressure on Milosevic.
Milosevic is going to listen to them? All of a sudden, Milosevic is going to be responsive in a democratic manner to the people of his country?
I remember pictures in Romania, you know, where you couldn't get rid of the Ceausescus, but finally they were chased like dogs into the courtyard and shot, and that's what's going to happen to Milosevic. His people can only be fooled so long.
I'm Alan Combs. We continue the conversation. We're joined by retired Army Colonel David Hackworth, Shirley Cloyes, Balkan Affairs Advisor for the Albanian American Civic League, and Frank Gaffney, Director of the Center for Security Policy. Good to have you all with us once again on Hannity and Combs. Colonel Hackworth, what should we be doing right now? How should we be getting the message across that any harm done to these three American soldiers would be met with very severe repercussions?
Well, we should state very clearly that they should be treated under the convention of the Geneva Convention, and that's it.
Well, what is that? So they may put them on trial tomorrow, which would contravene the Geneva Convention.
Well,
so what do we do then?
Well, if they do, then we'll have to take appropriate action. But in my case, I think having experienced this, my battalion had probably 40 men captured by the Serbs in 46, 47, 48. And always by some clever means, as they've applied apparently in this case, and invariably they released them. So we'll see. I think they're going to make a public trial, get as much propaganda about from this. And this is what this whole trip right now is about. As the bombs fall,
But using that for
everybody's
propaganda is
doing,
also against the Geneva Convention. That also goes against the Geneva
well, that's right. But they're going to try to milk as much propaganda as they can, as they did with the good senator when he was in Hanoi.
Frank Gaffney, what should we be doing right now?
Well, I think we should be focusing our war aims where they should have been from the beginning. In fact, where they should have been before we actually got into these kinds of hostilities, and that is at the removal of Slobodan Milosevic from power. It's inconceivable to me that we would be going through all of this exercise and still be talking about bringing him back to the negotiating table. The trial, which presumably will begin tomorrow, the propaganda, the possible punishment of these soldiers, oughtn't detract for a moment our attention from the very serious threat that this individual and the clique around him represent, not only to his own people, including, of course, the Kosovo Albanians, but his people of Serbian ethnic origin as well, but also to the region beyond and to our interests there.
Shirley, Cloyes, you want to comment on this?
Yes, I absolutely agree with Frank Gaffney. I mean, why do we continue to speculate about Slobodan Milosevic? His patterns and practices are absolutely well established. So a trial will happen tomorrow, not surprising at all. We must pursue a policy that will finally bring this to an end. In my opinion, that means arming the KLA immediately and deploying the NATO ground troops.
And how many ground troops are you willing to send over there, Shirley?
Exactly the number that NATO said they would send, which is 28,000. No, they said they would send 28,000 ground troops if necessary.
There are 40,000 Serbian troops already dug in.
We know that.
What is 28,000?
And now let's look back at why that's the case. Why is that the case? From Rambouillet to Paris, we sat there, right? Supposedly in peace negotiations, we watched the buildup of Slobodan Milosevic bringing 40,000 troops to the Kosovo border. Not for a tea party, obviously. Bringing tanks, M84s there. And now we're paying the price of that. People are being exterminated. Now, are we going to look at the fact that Albanians are being exterminated and massively expelled? And that goes back to Frank's point, that we have to finally deal with what we've ignored all along.
Colonel, let me bring you back in here. 28,000 troops, 40,000 are already dug in. They do have the military equipment to blow these guys out of the sky. You want to make a prediction? How many dead soldiers are going to come back?
And Frank hit it right on the head. Is a little thing in the military called prior planning prevents poor performance.
Right.
And Clinton should have thought out. He said the other day, I'm amazed with these refugees. Doesn't he realize that since the beginning of war, since Sherman marched through Georgia and burned Atlanta, your old home base, that refugees are a part of war, and he should have had his forces employed, not 30,000, probably 100,000.
I agree with you. Many
all
more.
around, and that would, and not said to Milosevic, let me tell you that once we hit you with air, we're not going to use the next blow. I mean, in every case, we've telegraphed everything. We're going to do.
That's my point.
And we continue
you know what's and we continue to. But you know what's so here we're all agreeing this was ill-conceived. They're not prepared for this. He's made one bad move after another bad move, and then starting with Senator John McCain and others, now people want to take this deeper. Why empower this man to put other soldiers' lives in jeopardy when he has not made one single solitary move up till this point? Am I wrong, Colonel? That's been right.
Why are we ever going to empower? How can we
putting troops in on the
possibly
ground. Let
talk
me be
about
clear.
empowering this person? I mean, how can we say that bombing this person will empower him? We're the major military superpower in the world.
All right, but
we're working with 70 other members of NATO.
Frank Gaffney, if I can, but even, look, it's not only Colonel Hackworth, but Colin Powell and others. They all recognize you're not going to win this thing with a war campaign, and you're going to need a lot more than 28,000 troops.
How are we going to win then?
I don't think.
May I get a word in edgewise? I would just say, for the moment, don't put forces in on the ground. Look, the Kosovo situation, regrettably, is going to be rolled up here in the next day or two, long before NATO could put any number of forces in. They've got some lightly armed guys in Macedonia, but those guys aren't going to be able to deal with a fraction of what's in Kosovo on the Serb side. You've got to take the war to Slobodan Milosevic himself. I think some of that can be done by air power. Right. There are other means that can be brought to bear as well. I think just getting the truth to the Serb people could make a big difference here.
Here's what I don't understand.
They're not getting exposed to it at all.
Well, as the Kosovo refugee situation continues to escalate, we are hearing that airlifts will be getting underway, and several countries will be stepping in to bring some of those refugees looking for a safe haven into their own domain. The refugee crisis is being called the worst humanitarian disaster since World War II, but despite the bombs, the violence continues. Joining us now with some perspective on the effects all of this is having on the world community, we are joined now by former New York Congressman and president of the Albanian American Civic League, Joseph DioGuardi, and human rights lawyer and NYU professor Arthur Helton. Gentlemen, welcome. Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
Congressman, we're hearing reports now that several countries are stepping in, including the United States, to take some of these homeless refugees out of the area and bring them into to safer havens so that at least they can be sheltered and fed. Your reaction to this?
Well, it has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? But this is exactly what Mr. Milosevic wants. I waved this on several programs, the expulsion of the Albanians. This is the paper prepared by the Serbian regime since 1937.
Yes.
We will do exactly then what Milosevic wants, and he will then come up with some plan to petition Kosova. Listen, I can't understand NATO and the United States. We seem to be doing everything wrong at this point, except for the initial bombing. Why didn't we know that not committing ground troops would allow Milosevic to clean out Kosova? Why aren't we arming the Kosovo Liberation Army as we did the Croatians in the Bosnian War? I mean, is NATO so stupid that it would implement a strategy that would achieve the opposite of its announced goals? This is what's happening. And maybe they're not telling us the truth. Maybe these stories about Holbrooke meeting privately last year in England, there was some castle they went to make some deal that they could wipe out the KLA last summer so Milosevic could finally have his way, because there was some unholy strategy unannounced that we had to keep a large Muslim state from forming in the middle of Europe from Bosnia to Albania. These are moderate people. They look to the West. They're democratic. Why are we tagging them with this idea that they're fundamentalist Muslims?
You can ask all these questions, but the reality is we have these thousands of refugees who are now seeking safer havens, and it's a situation that has continued, that has spiraled out of control at this point, and it appears the Allies never expected such a catastrophe to take place, Arthur.
Look, the diplomats, the politicians, and the military planners have to come to realize that the refugee emergency is going to be dictating strategies and tactics for the next period. We are perhaps at the beginning of the middle phase, or the end of the beginning phase of this humanitarian crisis. Over the next few weeks, we will see play out a number of policy proposals, whether or not there should be protected internal enclaves in Kosovo, but that would require the introduction of ground troops, how we can make sure that the Macedonian border stays open, and that's why we are beginning to discuss resettling or accepting on a temporary basis asylum seekers in other countries, Norway, Germany, Turkey, the United States. And these are the kinds of issues that will drive the policy as the next 300,000 to 600,000 ethnic Albanians make their way to the border.
Oma, I'm a certified public accountant. I think I know how money is spent. It would cost us a fortune to take 100,000 refugees from there and put them in the United States and other NATO countries. It would be much simpler to work with the Prime Minister of Albania. He's announced this, Pandeli Michael. He'd be willing to take as many refugees. We could build the facilities there, leave those facilities to the poorest country in Europe after these refugees return. We cannot allow these refugees to leave the area. They will never return. History has shown us that. They must stay there, and every one of them must be returned to Kosova. I am writing a letter today to President Clinton to let him know that we've made too many blunders already. Don't make this one. You'll be walking right into the trap that Milosevic has set.
Well, there are some reports, though, that the ground troops, if they do go there, and even using peacekeeping troops, that they would be used to escort some of these refugees back to Kosovo. Your response to that? Could that work? What would they be going home to?
Well, right now that's like Alice in Wonderland. That's not a reality. Certainly we want that to happen. You can't do it now while the Serbs still have any kind of police presence or troop presence. Rambouillet was wrong to say that they would leave 4,000 Serbian troops there. As far as we're concerned, and the Albanian American community is concerned, Rambouillet is dead. Independence is what the Kosovars want, and they want to go back. Everyone wants to go back to their homes. Listen to the refugees being interviewed. They say, keep bombing Milosevic. Yes, we will go back to our homes. This is their ancestral lands. They've been there for 10,000 years. Don't believe the propaganda of Slobodan Milosevic. He's poisoned the minds of the Serbian people, and he certainly poisoned the minds of the Serbian American people. I can't imagine what I'm hearing from the Serbian Unity Conference and these organizations.
But on that point, we are hearing reports that there are also Serbian refugees who are fleeing the area now, trying to seek shelter, and that they've been displaced as well, and that there was a human rights report that came out from the UN High Commission that both the Serbs and the Albanians are to blame for atrocities over the years that have been committed against one another, Arthur.
Absolutely not.
Look, what you have here, if you take any lessons from the conflict in Croatia or in Bosnia and Herzegovina, this is going to be very difficult for people to return to their homes. They may be able to return to some places, not their places of origin, not exactly their homes, but this will be re-engineering Kosovo, redefining Kosovo. That's what this conflict is about. It's a question of ethnic re-engineering.
Uma, Serbs are not being shot in the streets the way Albanians are. If you looked at the films that came in from the BBC, those are credible films. There are mass executions going on right now. I can assure you that's not happening. The KLA has not done that. If the KLA was a terrorist organization, why is every sacred monastery of the Serbian people still up today? Not one of them has been bombed. It's not the way of the Albanian people to terrorize other people. They've never been aggressors to anybody else. This is all propaganda of the Serbian propaganda machine.
I have just a few seconds left. Let me ask you really quickly. Do you think these airlifts will accomplish much, and the fact that the efforts are underway now to rescue some of these people, is that not at least something in the face of this incredible catastrophe that we're facing right now?
Absolutely. We must do everything we can, bring food, basic necessities, but don't remove the refugees from their ancestral homelands. They must be returned right now. Get the troops in there, our troops, NATO troops, remove all of the Serbs from there, and let Kosovo be independent and arm the KLA, and then you'll see peace and stability, because the Albanians look to the West and democracy. Milosevic is looking to Russia.
All right, gentlemen, on that note, we have to end the discussion, but I thank you both for joining us with your insights. Certainly a very troubling and disturbing situation that's taking place right now. We appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you.
Joining us here in the Fox headquarters in New York, former New York Congressman and President of the Albanian American Civic League, Joseph DioGuardi, and with us in Washington, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Senior Director for Foreign Policy and National Security at the Family Research Council. Congressman DioGuardi, let me begin with you. We have another bombing of an empty building in the middle of the night. What good is this? We're going in and bombing empty buildings. That's not going to have any effect on Milosevic, is it?
I hope it's not being done on purpose, but we have to continue the bombing. And I have to trust our military that they know what they're doing. And I hope their hands are not being tied. I keep hearing these comparisons to LBJ in Vietnam, where he was trying to micromanage what buildings to bomb and whatnot. I hope this is not the truth.
Well, Colonel McGinnis, is this a way to fight a war?
No, it's not, Alan. And in fact, I'm very concerned that we're escalating this with 24 Apaches and the LRS going in there, which essentially, as I'm concerned, that's ground forces. And we need to recognize, Alan, a couple of clear facts. During World War II, 22 German divisions plus 200,000 Croatians couldn't subdue the Serbs. And in fact, Tito, for 40 years, built a massive underground complex. That's where his army is today, with their tanks and their food, and they're ready for us with thousands of anti-tank mines with gas, sarin gas, which they've already tested. And so this is news you haven't heard about.
Why does it take us 3 weeks? First they said it would take 2 weeks to get the Apache helicopters. Now they're saying it's going to take 3 weeks. I don't understand why it takes so long to get what we need over there. Why is that?
Because the readiness is in the tubes. We don't have the people assigned where they're supposed to. The helicopters are going to have to pay parts from older helicopters to fix these, and then they deploy. Of course, the humanitarian support issue is also in the mix.
Why did we announce that we would not have a ground component? Why did we send any signals to Slobodan Milosevic?
Well, that raises a great question, Colonel McGinnis. That's the point. This was very poorly planned from the beginning. We announced that's going to be the case. 12 days to get the USS Roosevelt over there. We're running out of cruise missiles. Warnings by the Joint Chiefs that weren't heeded by this president, that they shouldn't involve themselves only in an air campaign. 3 weeks we got to wait for the Apaches. What's going on here, Colonel? I'm not a military expert. but this sounds like one of the most ill-conceived military missions I've ever heard of.
Yeah, it's Nintendo war-making at the worst here in Washington. You only have 11 of the 15 aircraft carriers we need. We pulled our AE-6Bs out of Iraq, where we're actually bombing people every day, over to this operation. We pulled an aircraft carrier out of Asia, where Taiwan is
Let me ask you
vulnerable.
about this, though, Colonel, because as you rightly so point out, we had heard that the U.S. fighter jet patrols over Iraq was so critically important, and 2 weeks later, they're not so important because they're headed over to Kosovo. You pointed out that the Kitty Hawk was the only aircraft carrier station in northern Asia. It's now to the Persian Gulf to replace the Theodore Roosevelt, running out of the cruise missiles. So what do? We take the cruise missiles that have nuclear capability, and we're going to dismantle that and turn them into conventional cruise missiles?
And
Alan, it's unbelievable.
And why don't we do something simple, as we did in the Bosnian War? Arm the Kosovo Liberation Army.
Bombs continue to pound Belgrade and Kosovo on this day 15 of the NATO action. All right, I want to go to you, Colonel McGinnis. I want to ask you, the State Department has named 9 Yugoslavian commanders. They say they're gathering evidence against them for war crimes to bring against the International War Crime Tribunal. Slobodan Milosevic's name wasn't even on this, even though he's the guy responsible. Now, if these guys know this is going to be the end game for them, will that not encourage further atrocities?
Well, I don't know if it encouraged further. I think, quite frankly, that the commanders are watching what they're doing. I think the police, for the most part, are doing most of these terrible atrocities. Generally, the professional soldiers don't do that. But, Sean, it's important to understand here that we're being called by, and unfortunately this administration is pushing more so toward ground assault or ground troops. Most of the people that are going to end up on the ground will be American forces. The European militaries are radically downsized, and yet we only have 10 active divisions, and they're scattered all over Kingdom Come. Well, we don't have the forces to do what we're about to do.
Colonel, you are with the Family Research Council, Colonel Bob McGinnis. You will also, as a part of a protest, be speaking in front of the White House tomorrow, and I'm sure you will be on Fox News tomorrow night. I want to go back to you, Congressman DioGuardi. I want to ask now, when we talk about Milosevic here in Yugoslavia, they closed the borders today. They started sending the refugees back, and this is all Milosevic is doing. And first of all, it seems that the NATO bombing is what we're hurting the very people we wanted to help, because there was a rise in an escalation by Milosevic as a result of the bombing. Did we cause all these problems?
We didn't cause these problems. They were happening for 10 years. The Albanians have been subject to brutal oppression. But going back to Milosevic, the real crime over here is that we still want to make a place at the table for Slobodan Milosevic. His name should be on that list.
I agree.
His name was put on that list by the U.S. House of Representatives last June, and by the Senate. There's no question he's the one that's to blame.
Congressman, no doubt he's a thug, but keep in mind that we have a crisis over there. It's been a civil war. The Albanians' hands aren't completely clean, especially the KLA. I think
don't create parity. There's no parity
The evidence is clear. They have conducted terrorist activities against the Serbs, but nobody's going to defend Milosevic.
You're probably getting that from the wire services from Belgrade. There's no proof of that. This is exactly what the Serbs are spreading around here.
New York Times, the Washington Post have published this over the last 2 decades. I have plenty of evidence, Congressman, and you do too.
There is no way to compare, even in the least, what's going on with the Serbs versus the Albanians.
But I want to get in on something that we glossed over before, and the fact is, as Sean started to point out, that the atrocities have gotten a lot worse since NATO went in. 360,000 refugees since the beginning of this conflict. And we've made things worse. They go to Macedonia, they're rejected, there's concern about imbalance of power in that area. We've caused this by what we've done. We haven't, and Milosevic has gotten what he wanted. He got the ethnic cleansing.
Did you forget we had Rambouillet, right? The 3 weeks Rambouillet was going on, do you remember what was happening? 40,000 troops were marching to Kosova. Tanks M84 with night vision. Did we cause that? It was happening while we were at the peace table, and they wouldn't agree to anything.
Colonel McGinnis, well, let's get the timeline straight here.
That was October.
Colonel McGinnis.
That was well before the bombing, Colonel.
Alan, we need to go back to what we were talking about 2 weeks ago. You know, we have come in the post-Cold War era into a very delicate situation where we have rogues like Milosevic that are really wagging this whole United States of America all over the globe.
And they shouldn't be doing that.
And they shouldn't be doing that.
And we shouldn't let them.
We need to revisit.
And Holbrooke shouldn't be dignifying him. He shouldn't have put him at the table at Dayton as a partner in peace.
You're right. You're going to get the last word tonight. Colonel McGinnis with the Family Research Council. We'll see you in front of the White House. Breaking news tomorrow, Colonel. Thank you for being on board. We have a lot more news to get to tonight, a breaking news night. Some of the refugees are missing. Where did they go? We'll talk to some people up close and personal to these unfolding events. Stay tuned to the Fox News Channel.